the story that you were telling about the fire?
Well, as I was saying before you turned the camera on, my grandfather, you were talking about he'd like to start a museum, and if anybody had any artifacts or little things relevant to the French community. My grandfather was a fireman, as I said, and he fought the fire. And the night or so before the fire broke out, my Aunt Jeanette died. It's a huge family mystery how she died. I suspect, from what I think I heard, was that my older aunt, my Aunt Delphine, may have dropped her, and she died. In any case, they called the undertaker, which was Mr. Orville Boucher, B-O-U-C-H-E-R, and he used to have a funeral parlor, but in those days, that funeral parlor was right across from the new St. Joseph's Church at the time. You know, where St. Joseph's is now was the brick church. It was right where the park is. There was a funeral parlor there, and there was a fire station there. My grandfather was at the fire station also there, but Orville Boucher was my grandfather's first cousin. So when the fire, the night before when the baby died, they had, or whenever the baby died, they had called the undertaker. The undertaker took the baby, then brought the baby back in the casket, had the casket in the house, all set up for a little wake. And all of a sudden the fire got going, and my grandmother, they were evacuating. My grandmother would not leave the house till the casket was on. And she had about 7 children. My father, being one, was only 3. My father was 1911, so he was about 3 years old at the fire at 1914, going on 3. It was June of 1914, and my father was born in September of 1911, so he was 2 and a half. And so they wanted her to get out, take the kids out, and go. She wouldn't go because the baby was in the casket still there. So Monsieur Boucher came back with a horse-drawn team, because that's how they would. He came back, took the baby, and they were going to bring it up to St. Mary's Cemetery on North Street to bury it or do something up there with it. They couldn't get through because of the fire, so he brought the baby back to his funeral parlor, which had a barn next to it, a garage, a barn, and he no sooner got and he was going to put the hearse with the casket in there and wait it out and see what happens. He no sooner got the casket in there, and the fire started jumping, and I guess it had already burnt the church. It took a big leap over, burnt the fire station, and it hit his place. And he managed to get the horses unhooked, from what I was told. And the horses didn't get burned. Well, the whole building and the barn and the casket got burnt up. Everything burned. I don't know how long after the fire my grandfather went back, and he started digging through the rubble to see if the baby, what was left, was going to... all I know is, I don't know whether there was anything left of the baby, but they had a crucifix in the casket. He found the crucifix, and it was brass, and one arm on the cross, the left arm is all melted off. The bottom of the cross, up to the feet, up to Jesus' feet, was burnt. It's all black, and so on the back you could see where he carved, my grandfather carved with a pen, I think it was June 14th, whatever the date of 1914, or June 20-something in it. Well, they didn't have any money, but that was what was passed down. And when my grandfather and grandmother died, my grandfather died because my grandmother had it. She came to live with us. When she died, that cross, a crucifix, stayed in our family, and I've got it. So I've made a nice display case, and I actually looked up Jeanette's birth certificates. I can show when all the babies were born. There's no death certificate for Jeanette. It was never filed over at City Hall. There's no death certificate for that baby. And I remember one time when the Salem News, when I was police chief, was doing a big story on the fire, and I happened to tell this to one of the reporters, and I mentioned how I think it was my father, or maybe my Aunt Delphine told me how my grandmother took the children with clothesline. When they got the baby out of there, she was willing to leave the house, and they went to Mr. Dion's boatyard. The boatyard's still there now. Freddie Dion, my grandfather did a bunch of things. He was a fireman. He worked as a mechanic at Freddie Dion's boatyard. 14 kids, you got to do what you do. And he also helped embalm bodies and helped his cousin with funerals. He was a man of many trades. But anyway, my grandmother was taken on board a ship down there, a boat. And she managed to, and she was pregnant, by the way, for another baby. She had all the children, at least, and I can't remember who told me, but she had them all in tow on a clothesline. And she was climbing the gangplank, and she, as she was getting on, fell herself, and I guess she ultimately did some damage to the baby because she eventually had a miscarriage after the fire. But anyway, she got on the boat with the babies and the kids, and they set out, and they watched Salem burn, and my grandmother did, from the vantage point of the Salem Harbor. But I was telling that story to the news, and they printed portions of it, and I remember my Uncle Leo, who was my father's older brother, who would have been older than my father by several years. He didn't like the part at all I was saying about the baby dying and all of that. It was like that was a taboo, and I can't remember distinctly, but he didn't call me, but he called my Aunt Muriel and was giving Muriel a hard time about it. And I think it was actually Muriel who told me the story. And that's where I found it, because Muriel was the youngest of all the children, as I said, and she stayed home the last. And I think she's the one, I used to talk to her a lot, and I think she's the one that told him, but he was very upset that I mentioned that in the paper. And Muriel said she didn't know how the baby died either. But they know the baby died. I get the suspicion is it was dropped, and it could have been by the oldest daughter, Delphine. But anyway, I remember I got a backdoor tongue lashing through. Muriel said Leo's mad at you for saying that.